Thank all the panelists for their excellent testimony. Ms. Gottmuller, we know China is moving rapidly to become essentially a peer competitor in the nuclear arms race. How can we engage them? And I think, at least I believe, we should try to engage them and Russia in arms control talks and have perhaps an agreement, and what might be the starting point and what might be the end point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that with regard to China, my colleague Frank Miller is quite right. Thus far, they have been difficult to engage. There's no question about it. I do find, however, that there is a considerable amount of work that has gone on behind the scenes in China, because I work quite a bit on so-called second-track activities where it is clear to me that they are studying the matter, so to say. The key thing is for them to get the political go code from Xi Jinping and from the top Chinese leadership. So I continue to believe that it is necessary to work very hard to engage them, and as I put it in my own remarks, to really understand what is behind that opaque curtain they have draped around their nuclear modernization. I know that they are modernizing. We can see that in their triad structures. And I know they are building up warheads. My argument, sir, is that we have some time to consider this matter. We will have strategic warning if the Chinese decide to sprint to parity. You mentioned yourself, as did Mr. Inhofe, that we expect to see China reach 1,000 warheads about 2030. More or perhaps less, but we don't expect to see them sprint to the level of the approximately 4,000 warheads that the United States has at the moment. So I think we have some time to watch and to try hard to work with them and to get them to recognize the value of negotiated restraint. So I think that that is the most important point I would say about China.
Ambassador Edelman, your comments on this issue?
Chairman Reid, I am somewhat skeptical about the willingness of the People's Republic of China to engage in this kind of discussion with us, and partly because, like my colleague, I broke my pick on this, in the Bush administration. When President George W. Bush met with Hu Jintao, they agreed that there should be a dialogue between the then 2nd Artillery Division and STRATCOM. And despite multiple efforts, including my own, we were never able to get there during the remaining 3 years of the Bush administration. I know that in the Obama administration, very serious efforts were undertaken by then Deputy Secretary Jim Steinberg to engage in this kind of discussion, all without result. And there's certainly been no willingness publicly on the part of the Chinese to even entertain the notion of arms control, negotiations. In fact, they have held those out as something that goes on between the United States and Russia, but not something that they participate in. So, the best I think we can do is to work in the Track 2 domain. And I would note that in the history of the U.S.-Soviet arms competition, it took a very, very long time, more than a decade, really, of pugwash conferences and others to lay the groundwork before we got into serious arms control negotiations with the Soviet Union in the late 60s. So that would be the best case in my view.
Well, but it's an area I think we must pursue in terms of the multiple approach towards the threat, not only having deterrence, but also talking about, and maybe it'll take 10 years, but those are probably 10 years of worthwhile investment. Ms. Creed, you have experience at the National Nuclear Security Administration. You talked about some of their problems. How serious is the challenge NNSA faces in terms of modernization, of keeping up with the effort?
Thank you, Senator. I think the problems with modernization actually exist across the board. So DOD has them, NNSA has them. With respect to NNSA specifically, the most significant problem at NNSA really is the infrastructure. A lot of it's very old. Almost all of it has either been replaced or is in the process of being replaced. It's a huge construction effort that's going on, and with a lot of delays. The second thing is really people. The complex is really struggling to attract, retain people, and get good people trained up. So it is significant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, very quickly, my time is expiring. You have spent years studying the Soviet Union and Russia. Can you comment very briefly about the recent events and how it would affect arms control? Putin has made wild statements about using nuclear weapons, or other people have. Can just a quick sense of what you feel?
So I believe, Senator, that Putin understands that our retaliatory capability is adequate today to prevent him from attacking ourselves or our NATO allies. I think that we need to continue to modernize our force to be able to do that into the future. And if there is arms control in the future, somehow it needs to get a handle, as this committee and the Senate said back in 2010, to get our arms around their short-range nuclear weapons, which is the one he's threatening to use against Ukraine. But I think the key is to be able to maintain a credible deterrent against him and against Xi Jinping.
Thank you very much. Senator Inhofe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.